Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and welcome to our Codurance meetup. So my name is Lucy. I'm the UX designer at Codurance from the Barcelona office. And just so you know that Codurance, we're a global consulting company. We were born out of the software craftsmanship community. And our goal is to enable organizations to drive innovation through agile software practices, hands-on expertise, specialist expertise, and expert advice. So we like to help organizations build secure, flexible, and scalable software that matches the needs and demands of their business. So presenting today's talk will be Mac, who is a software craft person at Codurance. Mac comes from a scientific background. He has formal qualifications in psychology and computer science. And today he'll be talking about soft skills in software development, which is a super interesting topic. And if you have a career in software development, obviously soft skills are something that's really important to work on and learn about and can be very interesting. So in today's talk, Mac will wrap up on different personality types and talk a little bit about how they fit into professional context and team building. After we've had a bit of a chat, we will then shift from theory into practice and play around with some Miro boards, which should be really fun. We'll go through several exercises and learn exercises that could help us strengthen our core skill set. I think it's time to go over to Mac, who will take it away.
Okie doke. So today, part 2 of what we sort of started on the last time. So we're going to cover a few things that I'll outline in a second, so don't worry about this. So a tiny bit about myself. So for the continuity purposes, I'm wearing the same turtleneck as the last time. And otherwise, I think Lucy outlined pretty much everything you need to know about me. And for us to sort of continue and move on with the whole thing. So some sort of ground rules. So based on the previous meetup that we've done, I've slightly changed the format of the session. So first of all, I just want to make it slightly more relaxed. So previously what we've done like an hour proper lecture. And I think Thursday afternoon, after everyone has done like a full day of work probably and done like 3 previous days of full-time work, no one is really like too keen to do a full lecture in the afternoon. So today I will definitely cut down on the slides and actually, like lecturing sort of style. And we sort of try to do it slightly more conversationally. So when we sort of switch off from this sort of like few slides that I'm going to present, feel free just to jolt in any questions that you might have, and we sort of try to address it as we go on. So like I said, I'm also dropping like most of the slides. To start with, they don't seem like the best medium, and after a while it just sort of like go quite blind and it's just too much to take. So I will just do a few slides to get the point across, lay out an agenda, and then that'll be pretty much it, and we'll just have a chat. And then afterwards I'll share my screen again, so we go to Miro and we'll do a few exercises that might or might not be fun actually for you to do. Also on that note, I think it would be helpful for you to have a pen and paper ready, because we'll do some things. I mean, because of the format of it and because we're doing everything remotely, it'll be impossible to admit everyone onto Miro and start to do stuff, because then there's no way that we're going to actually anything in that time. So just keep a notepad, keep a pencil or a pen or whatever you want to use, and just write your answers or whatever you want to do and take some notes as we go on, because it will also help you. And also, last time I slightly overrun a few times, and the session was generally too long. So today we're making it much shorter, and I will do my best to finish even earlier than this. Also, Q&A didn't truly work last time, so that's why we're doing the questions as we go on this time. And I think that's pretty much it. So I will use Miro, but is by no means this is like the best available tool or the only tool. So if you want to then recreate those exercises or do them with your own team or whatever, you might use Miro, you might use other things. So find whatever is best for you. By no means this is any sort of advisement or anything like it. So feel free to do that. So basically the theme is less is more this time. So what we're going to do, a quick recap today. So we're just going to go through the themes that we covered the last time. So I'll probably extend it a bit more because I know there are quite a few people who didn't attend. Then we're going to have a quick look at the personality and personality traits and generally the history of the 10 and why it's basically useful for us as well. And then we move to the practical bit. So we're going to do 3 or 4 exercises depending on the time. So one of them will be to do with active listening. And I think this will be the one where we get to interact the most. And this is when we actually go to Miro and do some bits and pieces. And we also talk about how you can incorporate certain workshops or practices into your professional environment, because I know it is a challenge for most of the people. So we'll discuss about some strategies that you can use to do that. In terms of the exercises, we'll look at some exercises you can use to practice your empathy. It's quite relevant. I also look at role playing, which can be very helpful if you try to establish certain skills like negotiation, for example. And finally, we're going to wrap up with something that isn't necessarily an exercise that you do with the group, but it's something more of a introspection. So we're going to sort of borrow from the CBT practices and look at certain self-evaluation and self-check. Then we're going to wrap up and hopefully we'll be able to finish within less than 45 minutes. Let's hope so. That is my goal for today, and I intend to stick it. So I'm going to start the timer on my second screen. Okay, cool. And like, you know, this is a series, so we'll be doing a third and final part, March the 4th. So on that meetup, we'll actually discuss how to set up experiments and how to measure change. So whatever you're trying to implement within your teams, or with yourself, you have to know sort of whether or not you're making any progress, and also whether or not the results that you're getting are actually good results. So on the next meetup, we'll basically cover some bits and pieces. So also a bit of a statistics, maybe we'll see, but generally how to set up those experiments so you can actually see if you're getting the results, and also use those results to present, for example, to the business to say, you know, those things that we're doing, they actually are valuable. And on the theoretical bits, just to still do some sort of lecturing, we'll cover bits about attention and or the lack of that we all seem to be exhibiting more and more in the current times. And hopefully, time permitting, we'll do 1 or 2 more exercises that you can practically do with your team. So to recap the previous meetup, we've done several things, but primarily we have set the scene of the soft skills in the context of software development. So the first thing that we sort of covered was to discuss how software development is actually a social technical practice. So we look at some research, we look at the numbers, and we look at the motivations that developers basically have in the context of, you know, of our work. We saw that basically half of our time and effort in software development is basically focused on non-technical challenges. And as a part of it, we also identified that those non-technical challenges, you know, can be classified basically after soft skills. So then we sort of looked at the soft skills and how they are, you know, quite flawed concept. So we looked at its sort of historical origins and how it sort of originates from the military, and then it sort of like semantically drifted basically to basically lose the meaning and to get all a bit blurry and quite unhelpful for us to basically use. Then we used a core, which is competence in organization and relational effectiveness, as a sort of rebranded and more business-focused version of the soft skills that we can basically use to basically train and also make it more appealing for us to pick up the soft skills and actually learn them. After that, we look at 2 purely theoretical concepts. So one was the theory of mind. So basically our ability to reason about other people, their goals, what they're thinking, what their motivations are, about their emotional states, and also to allow us to predict what they're likely to do next and why they do things they do. And finally, we sort of wrapped up with the cognitive biases, and luckily Emily sort of like highlighted the main takeaway for it was it's helpful to think about cognitive biases in a similar way you would think about optical illusion. So cognitive biases are, in a way, those cognitive illusions. So even though you might understand them and you might recognize them in a particular context, as soon as you switch it, you will fall for them again. So with this, we're focused about policy making, basically. So we sort of reached the conclusion that it is not really possible or practical to debias people or the activities that they do, but we should focus on actually debiasing the tasks that people are doing. And as a final bit, we sort of identified 3 hypotheses why people, and especially software developers, find the soft skills not appealing, or why they basically totally ignore them altogether end to end. So first of all was stigma. So it wasn't a particularly appealing thing to do. So we then addressed it through the core stuff. And then we looked at the training framework, or the lack of. So that's something that we'll be addressing today. So we know in education and in other places, there isn't much space basically to train your soft skills. We will address it today. And second of all, it's not a skill, but a trait. So that's also something that we'll look at today when we talk about the personality. So personality. So now, before we actually start, and I promise this is going to be 2 more slides, and that's it, no more slides, then we just have a chat. But we're going to start with the tiny experiment really. So what I'm going to do, I'll show you a piece of text. What I would like you to do is basically read it as you would do with a normal text. And then on a scale of basically 1 to 5, so you have this Likert scale, absolutely inaccurate to absolutely accurate, just rate how you think this text relates to you. And then we're going to have a quick discussion about what it means. So here goes the actual text. Can you actually read it? Boop. Okay. So I'll give you a few moments, just read through it. And once you read it, just drop a line in the chat on 1 to 5, how accurately this describes you. All right, cool. So let's move on. So basically, and that is the very last slide. Basically, I'm going to have a look at the results later on, but depending on your setup and how the original research was actually done was students in a university accent. If you feel confident enough, you can turn on your camera so we can all sort of see each other and have more of a sort of like natural interaction. So the thing about personalities is that most of us, unfortunately, well, or fortunately, believe that we have a strong ability in understanding other people. And most of us think we are quite competent when it comes to assessing such personalities. You will often hear people saying, oh, well, he's an extrovert, or he's this or that. So we quite consistently and quite often would do such an assessment. But the thing to sort of remember about such an assessment is that we run them through our own lenses and our mental models. So we use our own perspective to sort of draw inferences about what personality type someone is. And quite often when we actually do those estimations of personality, we'll remove as much detail as necessary so it will actually fit our model, so we can basically do it quickly, nicely, and and to confirm our own beliefs and our all existing models. So also the purpose of knowing more about personality is to extend our models. So basically, the more robust our models are, the more accurately we can do those things. So that would be our one goal today. And on the other hand, it's a natural tendency of people to categorize and label stuff and people. So there is no need or way to actually fight it. But what we can do is improve our models. And the other thing that we know about how people assess the personalities and how they deal with it, they do two things. First of all, we tend to be overconfident in our ability to do so. And second of all, most commonly, we are very incorrect about assessing people's personality. So on a concrete example, people very often would say, I'm an extrovert. I'm an extreme introvert, but I know that I'm an introvert, so I would then act upon this knowledge and basically engage with people more readily, just to sort of combat my introversion and basically be more effective at work. So that would be one thing that we should be focusing on, is basically to extend our mental model. The other thing that people generally do when they sort of assess the personality is that they would rarely admit that they are actually poor judges of the personality. And I think that's something that we cannot fight with. So today we'll just reinforce that and we'll say we are actually pretty good judges of personality, and what we'll do, we'll just improve our ability to reason about it. So in general, when we sort of think about the research in personality, it focuses on the question of in what respects are we, or me, alike all other people or some other people, or in what way I am absolutely unique individual. And with modern technology, so Oreo, CAT scans, fMRIs, MRIs, etc., we are able to basically reason about this on very different levels. So we can basically go from neurons to the whole narratives, basically. So it gives us a nice, broad, and rich spectrum of information about the personality. In terms of the definitions, we get quite a lot of them, which is not dissimilar to the actual whole soft skill stuff. But the reason for it, I think, is very different. So some of the definitions of personality, some of them convergent, some of them sort of divergent, is that one definition would say that it's a collection of perceptions, emotions, cognitions, motivations, actions of an individual in a very specific context. While other definition would say that they are, psychological forces that make people uniquely themselves. Other definition, on the other hand, will say, it's simply styles of behavior or visible aspects of one character, or it's a unique manner in which person thinks, feels, behaves, and relates to others, and so on and so forth. The definitions are quite numerous, but what it sort of points to is that it is a area of research or study that is actually that has a pretty long and diverse history. And I think it's sort of worth looking at the history, how we sort of reached the state of the knowledge that we have today. So historically, we sort of started with this very philosophical approach. So we have people like Plato, for example, talking about soul and those three basic forces of reason, emotion, and appetite, which you can sort of compare it to this Freudian id. Basically, I need stuff, I want stuff. Through Aristotle talking about the psyche. And quite interestingly, he was the first person to actually speak how it's actually a product of biological processes. I mean, he got it completely wrong, but the whole idea was very good. Then we have Descartes, that he was talking about the interaction of divine and primal forces. And he basically said the personality is the soul, something that is pure, perfect, and sort of like intangible. So, we have the first of like notion of the unconscious sort of bit of it. And then we have, Machiavelli, on the other hand, speaking about personality being relevant in the situational context. And that's something that, for example, if any of you actually read Solzhenitsyn and the Gulag Archipelago, he actually revisits that theme when he's talking about people behaving in the way they behave because of the very specific historical context. And it is quite relevant for us because we draw those perspectives from this philosophical point of view, and then it allowed us as the scientific methods that evolved to build upon it. So in the scientific sort of area, we have Freud talking about psychoanalysis. So he sort of starts to talk about unconscious processes that make up the personality. Then we have Jung and his new psychoanalytic approach when he's talking about conscious individual in the context of the stuff social interactions. Then we have Rogers and Maslow with their humanistic approach, where people, when they sort of stated that people fundamentally are good and strive towards, maximizing their personal development. And that's something that you very often see in sort of mainstream or coaching psychology. Like most of them, they will outline people are good, people strive towards, their own personal goals. So this sort of philosophy work with the science basically of personality sort of shows up. Then we have Watson and Skinner. So, this sort of behavioral and sort of conditioning sort of thing. So you probably remember their experiment with the dog and saliva and all of that. So with then, again, they sort of stated that personality emerges as an outcome of reinforcements and punishments. We have, Eisneck talking, going back to sort of, almost Aristotle, talking about how it's, genetic, biological, we have genes, hormones, neurotransmitters, and, outcome of our personalities is actually interaction of those things that are actually purely biological. It is reductionist, but there is still validity in it. And then we have Cattell, for example, talking about traits. And that's something that we'll actually pick up quite heavily today. And with this approach, they explain the difference in personalities through a collections and combinations of different traits that are quite consistent across the whole spectrum. And finally, we go to Bandura, for example, when he had very cognitive focused approach, where the personality is the results of the interplay of sort of like learned and innate styles of thinking. But all of those things can be sort of like boiled down to the sort of two main thoughts, or basically two main approaches, let's say, and one sort of very special case. So one approach is the idiographic, which focus on the sort of idiosyncrasies of each individual. And with this approach, you will approach each person as a very unique individual. So what you would never do, you would compare one person to the other. Everyone is unique. There are no traits. There's no framework like that. We look at everyone as a very, very specific individual. On the other side of the spectrum, we have nomothetic approach, which again says each person is individual. So I think this sort of like there is a consistency across the spectrum. Everyone is quite unique. But in this approach, we actually start to talk about traits or collection of things that are set in stone, and people are just different combinations of those things. And this is when we start to compare one person to another and see how they're different on what sort of axis, and how we can basically break it down. And there's one special case, so a very specific perspective, how you look at the personalities is actually situationalism. And with this one, as the name suggests, it would say that the personalities are actually quite flexible. Yeah, my voice is giving up already. So the personalities are quite flexible, and they will change depending on the situation in which you are. So let's say you're having a coffee with your mother, you will show a certain personality. You go to work where you need to be a leader, you would have a very different personality at this time. So with this approach, they more focus about those external factors that shape what sort of personality we actually display. So like I said before, today we are going to focus on a trait-based approach to personality. And with this one, the history, again, it is quite long, but it started like a lot of things with a tiny bit of research. So we had a guy called Alport. So what he's done, he took a dictionary and he went through a dictionary and found pretty much every single word that in any way describes your personality. He noted them down, he categorized it, and then he said, this is where we start. And this is how it actually started. So then another guy, Cattell, that I mentioned earlier, he sort of followed up on this research. So he further narrowed it down, he further categorized, he collapsed some terms that were basically, they meant pretty much the same thing. And then he added this sort of experimental, so empirical layer to it. And then if you look even more down, you would go to ASNIC, which from, like Cattell, which was like 16, I think that was categories. He narrowed it down to basically 3 dimensions of personality. So with the ASNIC's approach, you have introversion, extroversion, neuroticism / emotional stability, and psychotism, which is pretty unwanted behaviors. But what we're going to focus today is this middle ground between all those approaches that are too broad or too narrow, which is the 5-factor approach to personality. And this model is actually quite good. So it offers several things. It's a nice framework, and it's a simple framework to sort of understand. And literally, you just need to remember the acronym OCEAN, which we'll expand on in a bit. And it's a valid model. It's got good evidence base for it. It is widely accepted by a lot of people. But like any scientific model, there is criticisms, obviously, and there are its flaws, obviously, but it's a good sort of starting point for most of us to start a conversation about personalities and how to approach them. So, as I've already said, the big 5 is the so-called OCEAN. So O would stand for openness to experience, C would stand for conscientiousness, E would stand for extroversion, A, agreeableness, and N for neuroticism. And we're just quickly going to blitz through it to sort of describe what is what. So with the openness to experience, and this is how you basically, those are the dimensions through which you can basically judge the personality of pretty much every single individual. So basically what you can do, you can narrow down each person to be somewhere on the scale of extroversion to introversion, somewhere around there. And then you have openness to experience. And again, you have persons somewhere around there. And through which you basically get this sort of like model of what this person is, which is helpful. It's not an ultimate, it's not a silver bullet to understand everything, but it helps us to sort of think more broadly about the people. So going back to the actual OCEAN, so with the openness to experience, it's a general tendency, and all of them, they are tendencies. There are things that people are more likely to do. There are not set in stone things. There are things that basically make us more prone to make a certain decision, etc., etc. So with the openness, we're looking at the tendency for an appreciation for experiences, both internal and external, and it's to have certain aptitude for creativity or imagination, being open to experiencing and really living your emotions, and having also greater awareness of your feelings as well. So quite importantly, what you would see of people who are pretty high on the openness, they will be quite willing to basically try and listen to new or very unusual ideas. But what it also means, on the other hand, is that certain people will be seen as being weird, upright, or basically being unpredictable, or sort of lacking focus, for example. And if you go from the sort of openness to the other side of the spectrum, just because you're very low on the openness, it doesn't mean that you're not creative or you're not innovative. But those people, you would perceive them basically as being a bit more dogmatic, maybe closed-minded, data-driven almost. So this is basically one spectrum through which you can look at people. And I think it's very often quite omitted that we don't think about people in this particular approach. Then we have the conscientiousness. And I think that's one of the most important, universally relevant aspects if you think about work settings. So this basically talks about self-discipline, acting dutifully, and motivation towards achieving your goals. And it's the ability to control and to regulate yourself as well. So people who are pretty high on the conscientiousness scale, there would be, you could perceive them as, stubborn or focused on the other hand. On the other side of the spectrum, again, you might consider people to be sloppy or, or people who are unreliable, for example. But again, those are the traits that you just have to be aware of. And again, those are the traits that you can work with. You can be aware that, well, I'm, for example, slightly sloppy in general. So it gives me some prompts to basically to action it and consciously adjust my personality and also my actions. Then we go to the extroversion. And I think that's the one that everyone knows, because extroverts in general, they have a pretty high visibility. So it's somewhat similar to vegans in this respect. And because the extroverts, they, like I said, they have the tendency to be up in your face and all over the place. But it doesn't always and only mean that they are talkative, that they are, very sociable, etc. It means that basically they look for a stimuli to come from the outwards, as opposed to the introverts who would basically look for those experiences coming from the inside. While the extroverts will be quite talkative, the introverts will basically be more sort of independent. I think the worst thing that you can sort of do, or miscategorization that you can do about the introverts, is to consider them as being shy or unfriendly. And I think that generally it is quite helpful universally for everyone, because shyness and unfriendliness are a very, very different things, and they are apart from the personality, and they are highly contextual and also connect with many, many other things. Also, to think about the introverts as well, they will be the people who are very independent. So again, it is a good trait in certain scenarios. Then we go to agreeableness. And with this one, it's relatively straightforward. It's the cooperation versus competitive attitudes. And this trait in particular is quite relevant for people who are in sort of managerial or leadership roles. Because in short, long story short, they are the people who would put other people's happiness or performance above their own. While people on the other spectrum, that would strive towards their own achievements more than anything else. But it's also, like tendency to sort of like get along with people, be kind, considerate, trusting and trustworthy at the same time, and generally helpful. And finally, we go to the neuroticism, which is the final thing on the spectrum. And very often you would see this one presented as its polar opposite, but then it doesn't fit in the acronym. So the opposite is the emotional stability. So the neuroticism is definitely one of the traits that you can actually label as being quite negative. And it's a tendency to experience negative emotions, such as anger or sadness or anxiety in the very exaggerated and the longer perspective. So, and it also translates to many situations where, you would interpret ordinary situations as threatening sometimes even, you would sometimes go when you would see a minor frustration, and then for you, it might seem like something that is basically undoable. So it's good to basically keep those things in mind. So we have a pretty wide spectrum of things. And I think, I don't want to cover in too much detail it today, but I think it's definitely worth for everyone to add more reading to help us build those mental models that we might have. So how is it useful for us, if it is any useful at all? So first of all, it is to guide our self-perception. So it's to understand ourselves better. So like I said, I'm an introvert. I know what I have to do to basically to interact better with the world. So I have to force myself and push myself out there to basically to interact with people, because I know naturally it will not come from myself. It will not come from within. So I have to motivate myself to interact more with people. And it will also help you with understanding other people around you as well. And the more think about it, the more empathetic you are, and the easier it is for you to create those meaningful relations with other people around you. And in general, I think it's something that we should also try and work towards. It's about the meaningfulness of those relationships with other people, rather than trying to basically play them or hack them in any particular way. So this is where we sort of wrap up. And at this point, I see there were no particular questions, which make me very, very happy. And we're going to play around with the actual workshops bit. And I already see that I lied to you. I am absolutely over time. Good stuff. Okay, cool. So we're going to blitz through it. And actually, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to run it in a way I wanted to run it, because then we'll not finish before 8 o'clock in the afternoon. So with the workshops, rule of thumb, whatever exercise you want to do with your team, do it on yourself first and run it a few times on yourself, because then you'll basically build this understanding of what you're actually trying to achieve. And also you'll be able to estimate the value of a given exercise. Also, depending on your work context, you might have quite a few problems to do those things. So you might have teams that are unwilling. You might have a management that is unwilling to do it. So try to use existing structures that you have in place to do those things. So one thing that you can do, and we quickly run it through it in a second, is to use, for example, retrospectives that you would do to do another exercise. And again, get a very similar value that you would get from a retrospective without doing your standard retrospective, what went right, what went wrong, etc., etc. Also, always write your scripts for your workshops. It's because when you actually do it, you want for the whole thing to go really seamlessly. And unless you've done a given exercise several times, I guarantee you will struggle to deliver it in a way where everything will be enjoyable. And also manage your expectations. I don't think it's really possible to achieve a lot with a very limited amount of sessions. So if you run it once, it will be okay-ish. If you run it twice, it will slowly start to improve. And also in the first session, especially if you try to do, like very new things for your team, especially when you try to talk about emotions and other things like that, people will not open to you. So don't judge people, don't get frustrated, it's fine. It takes time to build this psychological safety for people to engage with you. And it takes time for them to basically trust you and trust each other. So again, manage your own expectations and prepare yourself that it will basically take time. It will be a long process end to end for you to basically to do any sort of meaningful change. So again, I am going to share my screen real briefly. So the first thing is the exercise that you should be able to do with your team as you are doing your retrospective. Come on. So with your normal retrospective, what you would do, you would typically discuss, what sort of happened in the past week. With this exercise, you add a small twist to it, because you still want people to reflect on what has happened in the past. Yeah.
Maciej, sorry, could you make more? Could you make bigger the?
I will zoom in. No
you.
worries. I'm already on it. So basically, what you would do, you would take your standard format, but you would add a small twist to it. So like with any exercise of that type, first of all, and very often what I would do, you start with the prime directive. So you tell people, this is a safe zone, it's fine to do stuff, and you ask someone to actually read it out loud for you. And you make sure that everyone understands to it. Depending on the exercise, you might basically start up with a motto additionally to it. So for example, you might do a brainstorming. So for the brainstorming session, you might add, like an opening theme or a quote. Basically, you might go with, it's hard to learn if you already know. And you sort of, you try to prime people. So again, we go to anchoring that we covered last week. So you anchor people with the given approach to the exercise. And the prime directives that you probably do on your retros are a good way to do that. And you can add more to it to re-emphasize that people are safe in here and they can actually talk about their internal struggles. So basically with this exercise, the scenario is very simple. You give everyone 2 cards, one positive, one negative, and you assign the name to it. So they write on the post-it, and you ask them to select one thing from the negative spectrum. So being angry or anxious, lonely, relevant, bored or unmotivated, disappointed, defeated, and one thing from the good spectrum, so the positive emotion spectrum. So happy, enthusiastic, connected, supported, passionate, energized, or proud, accomplished. Obviously, you can change those things as you go on and tailor it for your team. So if you know your team is, struggling more on this sort of like disconnected level, you might add more hooks on this sort of disconnectedness spectrum to do it. So then you ask them to basically select one from each and, bring in the situation that triggered certain emotions. So you give them a few minutes to complete that. And once they've done it, you give them the rules of engagement. So you ask that both listeners and the presenters to pay attention to how it feels to speak about the positive and the negative emotions and note what the difference was. You ask also to think about how does it feel to share it. And again, what's the difference when you're sharing good stuff and what's the difference when you're sharing the bad stuff, and how it is for you to listen about that difference. And finally, something that's probably the presenter will feel much more is to observe their body. Are they feeling tense? Are they breathing normally? Are their palms sweaty, or are they shaking? How does it feel? And again, is there any difference when you're talking about the positive stuff and the negative stuff? So as you go around the table and people present those things, it usually takes, depending on the team, but around for 6 people, you would roughly take 35 minutes. And it's also, you will pick up certain things from it that you can still action as a part of your retrospective. So then you can naturally, after everything is finished, you can vote on a certain themes, and basically action it accordingly. But you would do, which is quite different to the retrospective, you would then ask people questions. So you would ask them, how did you feel when speaking during the exercise? Was there any difference when talking about the good and the bad thing? How did you feel when listening during the exercise? Did you notice any mind wandering when you were listening? And if so, what was the distraction? Did you mind judge while you were listening others? If so, how did the judging feel to your body, etc., etc. So there is a pretty well-defined list of questions that you can ask. I would not recommend actually going through the whole list because it's 10 questions and it will be a really long session, but you can pick the top 3 ones that you would like to basically introduce to your team and then ask it. And as a wrap up, you would ask, how would it feel if you approached any session with the sort of same attitude, when you consciously think about what people are saying, and also you think and feel when you are speaking rather than just basically blurring up. And if you repeat it enough, you would most likely see that shift where you can first of all have much shorter meetings because people actually pay attention to what is happening. And if they need to, they actually take notes. So you would be able to, over time, cut up on the actual meeting time. So I will post an instruction and a scenario for this particular exercise. And I can guarantee you this is the one that you can sneak into your retrospective rather quickly. But it's also something that you can do with yourself. So you can try it literally by sitting in front of your computer and speaking to, proverbial rubber duck. The other exercise, I'm just quickly going through it, but again, I will post it. So I will leave the instruction either on our blog or I will add it to the meetup page. So the other thing is when we talk about the empathy, so then one exercise that you do to deal with that is you ask a person to describe and outline a experience that happened recently that was frustrating, or a situation in they perceived that someone behaved absolutely irrationally. And then what you do is you ask your team or the people who are in this group to defend the person who behaved irrationally. So you ask the question, why this person was making these requests, or why they've actually done that to make you feel frustrated, or or for you to perceive them as behaving irrationally, how they might have felt. what impact the situation have had on those people who requested that thing of you, for example. And, you know, why, finally, it might be not so unreasonable for them to behave in this particular way. So with this one, there are multiple positives to this exercise. So one thing is it allows people to deal with the frustrating situation, because they build this cognitive model of the situation that is very different to how it was before. So they are able to cope with it as well. So you widen their perspective. And second of all, you teach them the skills to handle those situations in the future much better. Because next time something like that happened, they will be able to reflect what happened in the past and to say, well, actually, you know, this is the context of this person. This is what they do. This is their supervisor might be requesting something of them, etc., etc. So they are able to build, again, a better mental model for it. There is one more exercise in the empathy column, but it is extremely uncomfortable for most of the people, and I guarantee it will be very difficult for you to pull it off, but the payoff is pretty big, actually. And it's the exercise when you basically engage with strangers. I'm gonna stop the sharing. So the premise of this exercise is you divide your team into smaller groups. Some might do pairs or threes of people, and you assign them a task to engage with the person that they don't know, is unfamiliar with them. So it might be someone from a different department. It might be someone that they basically all don't know. And to simply ask them 3 questions that, you know, are quite personal, but not too personal. So something, you know, not too invasive. So, you know, like, what's your favorite juice, for example, or whatever. Something, you know, small but personal, something that will require you to have a proper engagement with them, and that will not be just a, you know, a simple thing. And the another rule of this engagement is, do not go into them saying, you know what, I have this assignment, can you just answer these 3 questions for me? No, the rule of it is to engage with those people in a more meaningful way. And also what you ask them to do is to write down very clearly what are their assumptions and their fears about this engagement. So for example, you would see people saying, you know, I'll look like an idiot and a creep because I'm engaging a person from another department. They will think I'm insane, or there's something wrong with it. And what you do, you also ask them about validation of those assumptions that they had. So when you actually do the interview with the person, or you engage with them, you know, ask them, do you think that, you know, me talking to you right now is a bit insane, or am I being a creep? And validate those things. And more often than not, you would actually see that your fears of engaging with other people were, you know, based on nothing, based on your fear and inability to do those things. And again, after all the groups has done it, you just share the experience with everyone, and then you share what you have just learned. And it's a marvelous exercise, but it's very, very difficult to pull off. So try with the smaller stuff. Definitely, you might try those things for yourself. So you might just go out there and try to speak with someone else and validate your assumptions about this engagement. And final thing that you can do, again, difficult, but immensely valuable, especially if you're looking at the more sort of like solid, soft, well, core skills, which, you know, you can think about negotiations, or, you know, your ability to deal with the complex situation, understand them as well, or to do like simple things like, you know, doing a pitch for someone, for example, to present your idea, or, you know, a business case, is role playing. And there is no wrong way to really do it, but it's, again, it requires a lot of engagement from people. So it's not a sort of like entry-level exercise. It's something that you do with a group of people that have already done certain things and feel quite comfortable around each other. So you want to start with basically that. You can do like a light version of it. And what I can recommend, you can look, it was Harvard Business School, and they've done like a case study handbook. So the light version of this exercise, you're presented with a scenario of an organization, of a business case. So you see, you have those stakeholders, you have this business situation, and basically what you do, you just read the scenario and you analyze it. And you learn from what you just basically read. And it's basically, it measures your ability to basically to understand those complex scenarios, to understand the dynamics, to identify who the stakeholders are and who to engage with when you actually put in the situation. So that's the light version. The more advanced version would be to do an actual role play. So what we, for example, done quite recently was to pitch an idea to do an organizational transformation for a board of executives. So how you do such an exercise is, first of all, you need to identify the situation. So in our case, it was basically to pitch a transformational process idea to the board of members of boards. So you start with that. So what you need to do, and then you identify who the stakeholders are, what you try to achieve, what you'll need to do. In our case, it was to do the presentation and then to discuss with the board members what are the pros and cons are, and also to put them at ease that the things that we are proposing to them will be okay. So that's the first thing you do. Then you start to build up and add more details, who the board members are, how many of them, what idea you're trying to sell to them, etc., etc. So you build your whole scenario. And you also build the personas at this stage. So who the board members are, they might be based on the real persons that you know. If you know who the stakeholders will be, you might already know some things about who they are, what they're afraid of, etc. And what their personality types are. So you build their personas as well. Then once you build those personas, you add more detail to it, you assign the roles. So you would need some actors from your company. So it might be part of your team that basically will not be a part of the pitch. So you give them the roles and you ask them to put themselves in the situation when they basically have to do it. And once you've done that, you just play it out. And in our case, it was a phenomenal experience. It was difficult, it was stressful, and it was exactly how it was. And if I was to do it on the real stuff afterwards, I'll be much more confident, and I think I've learned quite a lot during that time. The final step when you're actually doing the role playing is to discuss it. So people who have their roles and people who actually done the stuff, they can all put into the conversation what they think was actually quite believable and what was, not so believable, what was difficult, what were the challenges, and when they basically faltered, for example, when they're actually doing the pitch and they're trying to negotiate. So definitely you need a structured discussion when everything is completed to review and get a feedback from your colleagues. And finally, the last thing is the introspection. And the introspection is something that you can do pretty much in any situation that you can do. And it's an exercise on this very personal level, and you can do it as a part of your diary or something. And it's heavily based on the premise from sort of like self-managed cognitive behavior therapy. And what you do every time a situation happens that basically forces you to shift your moods or your emotions. So you basically go from being a business as usual to being actually quite tense. You basically take a conscious effort to note it down and analyze this situation. And basically this comes from the premise generally in the cognitive behavioral therapy, when you have this interrelation between your thoughts, behaviors, and your feelings, and how they all feed to each other. And basically by adding meaning and and understanding the situation, you can resolve it slightly better. So when you notice it, and as soon as possible after, you can basically gather your thoughts and deal with it, even if it was a happy event. And I would say it's very helpful to do it when something good happened to you, because you can recognize those things better and get more joy out of it. So first of all, you notice what really actually happened. So you look at the facts. So what was the situation? What happened? When did it happen? What else was going on? Was the situation, who were you with during the situation? Was this something that happens frequently to you? So for example, you might be getting, into the lift back in the day, and, you were getting quite anxious in the lift. So you look at the facts first, then you look at your perception. So how did you perceive the situation? So how did your mood change? What did you feel as a result of your thoughts about the situation, and what your thoughts or images were just before and during the thing that have happened? And and also you can also wrap it up, what thoughts say about this situation and about you. So how your thoughts basically represent your emotional state and a result of it. And then you look also how your body has responded to it. So you would notice things like, how did your body in general change? So your palms might get sweaty, you might start feeling tense, you might feel that your belly is acting up all of a sudden, you might feel hot, you might get pins and needles, you might, I don't know, feel tired all of a sudden or lethargic. You know, there are many sort of states that your body can exhibit all of a sudden. Note that. It is helpful because then again, you can try and then regulate. If you're feeling tense, you can then actively try and relax your body. It's one of the things that you can do. And then as a final sort of step, you would note down, what did you do to cope with it? So what did you do? What didn't you do? But because you might be aware, you know, when I'm tense, I need to relax, but I didn't do it. So again, note that, and then you can reinforce it. So yeah, I need to pay attention to this. And in general, how did you cope with the situation? So I might say, I coped poorly. I totally lost it. I then went to the toilet and cried for half an hour. That's fine. That's perfectly right. But it's worth noting how you would react in the situation. And then if you know how the situation sort of plays out, you can act on it slightly better when it happens next time to you. And we are 1 minute after 6, and this is where we're going to wrap up. And if I am not mistaken, I'm not seeing any questions. So it was either extremely boring and unengaging, or it was clearly laid out. We'll never know.
Yeah. Thanks, Mac. Great talk. So yeah, if anyone does have any questions, feel free to, if anyone does have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat. But yeah, thanks, Mac. Super, super interesting. And if you'd like to see the next one in the series, we're going to be doing it on March 4th, and it'll be on our meetup page as normal. So check it out if you're interested. But yeah, it looks like.
Thank you very much, Maciej.
Yeah. Cheers, guys.
Yeah, to a question.
Go for it.
Yeah, sometimes I'm a bit introverted, as you know, and I think this Corona situation doesn't help me, because I think I can interact better with people when I'm face to face with, I mean, in the same place, let's say. So, how do you think? How can I improve my extroversion, let's say, in online interactions? Because it's something that is worse for me, I think.
Yes, there is. I don't think there is a way yet to sort of deal with this sort of like you lose a lot of cues from the words, so you can only focus on this like very limited spectrum of non-verbal and then all the verbal. So what I do is you actively look for pauses when people speak. So when you're speaking with someone, just pay attention when they pause, and those are your places where you can basically interact with them. And when you sort of learn to listen to them, you can basically try, okay, they've made a pause, I can speak something. If I speak, you know, something not entirely relevant, it will help me to engage with them, and it will help me to have a better interaction and be perceived as slightly more extrovert. That's basically one method that you can do, because you have very limited spectrum. In a social situation, you would look, you know, where the gaze of the person is, you know, how they behave, whether they're open or closed towards you. You don't see it anymore. So right now, for me, I rely on those, you know, very verbal and, you know, audible cues. So I hear a pause, and this for me, I could technically, you know, interrupt them and get in and converse with them rather than being, you know, very unidirectional thing. So that's one thing you can do. And then you basically gain confidence, and you also listen to it, so you know when you can interact, because this is also how people would very often give you this sort of signal that they want to engage with you, because they sort of like, I finished my thoughts, what do you think? And they do it by pausing very often.
Okay. Thanks, Maciej.
I think we're all good unless someone's typing. So in that case, thanks everyone for coming. And as I said, March 4th will be the next one, which will be the last in this series. And I hope to see you there. But yeah, thanks, Mike. Great talk. See you all next time.
Have a great day. Bye. See you all.
Bye.